Police stopped him the moment he stepped out of a campus building, finding a drive filled with millions of academic papers normally locked behind paywalls, instantly transforming a quiet morning into a federal scene. They expected a trespasser, not someone who had helped shape early internet tools and abandoned tech success to push for open access. As agents examined the drive, he realized too late that his act of idealism had collided with authorities ready to turn a download into a criminal narrative. From his teenage years, he created tools that shaped how information moved across the internet, designing early standards before most peers understood coding basics. Despite gaining wealth through a major startup merger, corporate culture suffocated his ideals, driving him toward exposing flaws in public systems. He saw court documents and research papers locked behind fees as injustices, not business models. A previous investigation into one of his scripts ended without charges, but instead of retreating, he became more determined to challenge structures that restricted knowledge. His writings on information freedom spread widely, resonating with researchers, librarians, and digital rights advocates frustrated by expensive academic barriers. He believed public knowledge should remain public, inspiring him to quietly target a vast research archive known for steep subscription costs. Using legitimate campus access, he launched an automated script that rapidly downloaded papers, a move administrators misread as a cyber attack. What he saw as moral repair appeared to others as intrusion, pulling him into a conflict he didn't anticipate escalating. When administrators blocked his access, he switched methods, triggering a digital tug-of-war that eventually pushed the archive to block the entire university. Realizing remote access wouldn't suffice, he hid a small laptop in an unmonitored wiring closet, letting it quietly gather millions of documents. Weeks passed before investigators traced the activity and installed a camera to uncover who was behind it. Unaware of the surveillance, he returned to swap drives, unknowingly sealing his fate with a few recorded seconds. The moment he exited the building after switching drives, officers moved in, arresting him publicly as if he were a dangerous intruder. Although the archive recovered everything and didn't want to press charges, federal prosecutors saw an opportunity to stretch a broad computer law into a high-profile case. His legal team expected a minor resolution, but instead charges multiplied, painting him as a digital thief. Posting bail, he thought the worst had passed, unaware that this arrest marked the beginning of a devastating legal battle. Federal prosecutors quickly reframed the entire case, leaning on an old computer law whose vague wording let them interpret automated downloading as a form of digital intrusion, even though no passwords were stolen and no profit was made. They treated his script like a break-in, arguing intent didn't matter when the scale of his actions challenged institutional control. What should have been handled academically became a federal project fueled by ambition and symbolism. His legal team initially expected the case to collapse, believing the archive's lack of interest and the harmless nature of the downloads would make prosecution pointless. Instead, each passing week brought new charges layered on top of the last, as though the government wanted to transform a minor dispute into a trial that could set precedent. The prosecutor's office described him as a calculated intruder, ignoring his open access philosophy entirely. Public reaction grew rapidly once news of the indictment spread, with academics and internet pioneers expressing shock that a non-violent information-related act was being punished with threats of decades in prison. Many saw the legal approach as excessive, a distortion of the law's purpose. Yet prosecutors seemed unmoved, framing the narrative as a stand against intellectual property theft, rather than addressing the system's deeper flaws. While facing these escalating charges, he found himself thrust into another major battle, one involving sweeping internet legislation that threatened to reshape online freedom globally. Entertainment giants backed a bill that would allow broad domain-level blocks and financial shutdowns of sites accused of hosting copyrighted content. Despite his personal crisis, he recognized the danger instantly and shifted attention toward rallying resistance, determined to prevent another layer of digital control. He helped form a coalition of activists, technologists, and civil liberties advocates who understood that the proposed law could fracture the technical structure of the internet and open pathways for censorship. While his own legal troubles mounted, he worked tirelessly to organize voices powerful enough to challenge the bill's momentum. calling for unity across websites large and small to highlight how easily such authority could be misused in the future. His boldest suggestion was a coordinated blackout, an internet-wide moment of silence where major websites would shut down temporarily to demonstrate what a censored web might resemble. The idea was unprecedented, yet it resonated immediately with communities fearful of losing online freedom. Conversations spread across forums and boardrooms as platforms debated responsibility and influence, many ultimately agreeing that drastic demonstration was necessary. When the blackout day arrived, thousands of websites replaced their usual content with stark messages urging the public to contact lawmakers. The sudden emptiness across familiar platforms shocked millions of users who had never seen the internet unite for a single cause. Phone lines at congressional offices became overwhelmed as citizens demanded the bill be stopped, turning digital solidarity into an undeniable political pressure. By the end of that intense period, support for the legislation collapsed dramatically, with numerous lawmakers withdrawing backing and others admitting they hadn't fully understood the implications. The coordinated protest was hailed as one of the most effective grassroots digital actions in history. For a moment, he tasted victory, watching the world respond to the urgency he had been trying to convey for years about unrestricted access and free information. Yet even this triumph carried consequences, because his rising visibility made prosecutors even more determined to secure a conviction. They viewed him not only as someone who bypassed academic barriers, but also as a symbolic leader capable of mobilizing massive public resistance. In their eyes, allowing him leniency might embolden others to challenge entrenched structures, and this fear hardened their approach. While opponents of the bill celebrated, his legal case continued to tighten around him. Prosecutors offered a deal that required him to plead guilty to a felony, a label he believed could harm countless activists and technologists by validating the broad interpretations used against him. They insisted on branding him permanently, refusing to consider any resolution that didn't include criminal conviction. The stakes rose unbearably high. He couldn't accept a plea that contradicted his moral stance, even though friends, lawyers, and family pleaded with him to take the offer for his own safety. They worried more about his well-being as pressures mounted, but he focused on the precedent such a conviction would set rather than on his personal future. Each refusal deepened the psychological pressure surrounding him as trial approached. Financial strain became overwhelming as legal fees accumulated, draining nearly everything he had saved from earlier successes. His independence shrank as he juggled mounting expenses, intense public scrutiny, and the looming threat of prison time. Sleepless nights became routine, and his previously sharp optimism began fading under the stress of a system that seemed determined to steer him toward collapse rather than fairness. Throughout this period, he continued working despite growing exhaustion, trying to maintain normal routines even as surveillance and legal constraints lingered around him. Friends noticed shifts in his demeanor, subtle distance, quieter conversations, and moments when fear slipped through his usual confidence. He joked morbidly about being monitored, though evidence later revealed this was closer to truth than he imagined. As court deadlines approached, his lawyers filed motions challenging the prosecution's interpretation of the computer law and requesting dismissal of exaggerated charges, but each attempt met resistance. Prosecutors doubled down, refusing to reconsider the felony requirement even if prison time were lowered. What began as a legal dispute now resembled a contest of wills, with him standing alone against a government determined to extract compliance. Underneath the legal strategies, he quietly reached a breaking point. The possibility of spending years in prison weighed on him, while the idea of accepting a felony haunted him equally. His internal struggle intensified until it overshadowed everything else he tried to hold together. Despite the support around him, he felt boxed in by choices that both seemed equally devastating. One winter evening, when the trial date loomed only weeks away, he sat alone in his apartment, overwhelmed by battles on all fronts. No message or explanation survived that night, only the silent outcome discovered the next morning. His death shocked the world, sending ripples through institutions, activists, and ordinary people who had followed his work, suddenly mourning someone whose ideals had shaped the internet more profoundly than many realized. The public reaction was immediate and explosive, igniting debates about prosecutorial overreach, institutional responsibility, and the mental burden placed on individuals who challenge powerful systems. Vigils appeared across cities, and universities faced protests demanding accountability. Many saw his death not as an isolated tragedy, but as the result of systemic pressure wielded without empathy or restraint. His death triggered an immediate political firestorm, with lawmakers, journalists, and digital rights groups demanding answers about how a non-violent, information-related case escalated into an unbearable level of pressure. Critics argued that prosecutors had used outdated laws as blunt weapons, stretching their meaning far beyond their purpose. Supporters of open access called his death a consequence of institutional rigidity rather than individual wrongdoing, fueling widespread anger. Universities found themselves in the center of public scrutiny, especially the campus where the events began. Students and faculty questioned why an institution that celebrated innovation didn't shield someone acting out of moral conviction, even if his methods crossed boundaries. Some believed neutrality had become complicity. Internal reviews were launched, attempting to explain decisions, yet many felt the explanations lacked sincerity. At the federal level, the Justice Department received harsh criticism for its approach, with petitions and protests demanding accountability from the prosecutors involved. Many questioned why a plea without a felony label was never offered, especially when the archive itself sought no punishment. Lawmakers sympathetic to digital freedoms called for investigations into whether prosecutorial zeal replaced reasonable judgment, and these concerns grew louder. A proposed reform soon emerged, informally tied to his legacy, aiming to limit the broad interpretations of the computer law used against him. The bill sought to distinguish genuine cybercrimes from actions that merely violated terms of service or involved non-malicious access. It inspired hope but faced immediate resistance from law enforcement lobbies, who argued the flexibility of the statute was essential for national security. Despite early enthusiasm, the reform stalled, blocked in committee debates where fears of weakening digital protections overshadowed arguments for proportionality. Activists criticized the political hesitation, seeing it as another example of institutions fearing transparency more than injustice. Even so, the conversation surrounding digital rights surged, and his story became a catalyst for pushing reforms across universities and online communities. Open access movements grew stronger in the aftermath, with researchers, librarians, and students increasingly vocal about the ethical responsibility to share knowledge funded by public money. Some universities expanded their open repositories, offering free access to more research. While symbolic, these changes marked a shift in institutional conscience, driven partly by the collective guilt and anger that followed his death. Major academic publishers also responded, not with sweeping reforms but with cautious pilot programs offering limited free access windows. These initiatives were widely viewed as overdue gestures rather than genuine shifts in philosophy. Nonetheless, they showed the first signs of pressure reaching the highest levels of scientific publishing, indicating that the debate around information freedom could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, activists expanded his work by creating decentralized platforms that aimed to bypass restrictive paywalls entirely. Some were legal, forming networks dedicated to sharing open access material, while others operated in gray areas, inspired by his belief that knowledge should not be hidden behind profit structures. These digital communities framed themselves as carrying forward his mission. Whistleblower-oriented tools he supported also gained traction, with major newspapers worldwide adopting systems that allowed secure document submissions. His influence on transparency extended far beyond the academic realm, encouraging journalists to adopt safer communication channels. These tools became vital in exposing government misconduct and corporate wrongdoing, giving his digital activism a lasting presence in modern reporting. Young technologists who admired him viewed his life as both a warning and inspiration, understanding the ethical weight of building systems capable of challenging entrenched power. Mentors and educators used his story to spark conversations about digital ethics, responsibility, and innovation. Many saw in his choices a rare blend of morality and courage, qualities they hoped to preserve while avoiding the consequences he faced. At conferences and online forums, debates grew about the fine line between principled digital activism and legal risk. Some argued that civil disobedience in the digital age demanded new legal frameworks that recognized intent and public benefit. Others feared that blurring lines between access and intrusion could destabilize security systems. These discussions, though divisive, were rooted in the questions he left behind. His legacy also reached international movements, where activists fighting for access to knowledge in developing countries referenced his writings and ideals. In regions where universities lacked the resources to pay for journal subscriptions, his message resonated deeply. Local advocates built open educational networks, citing his belief that knowledge becomes more powerful when shared without restriction. Documentaries, books, and academic studies soon began exploring the complexities of his case, examining everything from the structure of academic publishing to the psychological weight placed on individuals facing disproportionate legal threats. These works helped cement his story in public consciousness, turning his struggle into a broader reflection on the ethics of digital age governance. Although reforms have been slow and uneven, the movement surrounding him created enough momentum to shift global conversations about who owns information and why access remains restricted. Each small structural change, from expanded repositories to enhanced transparency tools, carried echoes of his influence, demonstrating how a single individual's stand could reshape debates spanning technology, law, and human rights. In the years since, his name continues to appear in discussions about digital justice, not as a footnote but as a central figure whose decisions forced society to question long-standing assumptions. His story remains a reference point whenever new legislation threatens digital freedom or when activists demand academic transparency. His legacy persists not through tragedy alone, but through the movement he inspired.